now it's time for our first review. This is Evil Dead Rise, which people who know and love me have warned me off watching because it's so frightening.
And I'm now going to do the same. But I want to preface this with a quick kind of story about my first encounter with Evil Dead. It was actually Evil Dead 2, and it was, I know people say, you know, the best place to experience any film is in the cinema. I think it's not always the case. So I saw Evil Dead 2 on TV when I was a student. I had no idea what Evil Dead was in those days, you know, pre kind of omnipresent discussion of cinema online. You could kind of stumble across something in this really organic way. And I remember sitting and watching it and thinking all the way through, you can't show that. You can't show that. And then sort of realising at the end of the film that, you know, cinema could do anything. And that was the kind of, I think, a really formative moment in my experience with film, was just kind of having seen what Raimi does in that film, thinking, this is it, you know, anything you can imagine and you can build can be depicted, and cinema is kind of limitless in this incredible way. There's a really vivid sense throughout Evil Dead 2 that nothing is off the table, okay? That anything that can be imagined, no matter how kind of horrifying or depraved or, you know, funny, could happen. And that is something that Evil Dead Rise recaptures incredibly well. So it was written and directed by a young Irish filmmaker called Lee Cronin, who made a film called The Hole in the Ground. Which was,
it's a changeling film, and I found that incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, deeply
it's a great
unsettling.
film.
And went down really well at Sundance in 2019. I think while he was at the festival, he had a meeting with Sam Raimi, and they'd discussed various projects. Raimi had seen the film and was very impressed by it. And he'd sort of suggested, oh, by the way, you know, were we to do another Evil Dead film, would you be interested? And I think, like all kind of horror filmmakers of a certain age, Evil Dead is, you know, the very kind of unholy Bible on the whole genre. And so Cronin kind of jumped at the chance to do this. And what he's kind of done with this is it's like a horror franchise experiment. So he's taken a winning recipe, because we know what has to happen in an Evil Dead film, but he's transposed it to a completely new setting. So there is a prologue set in the forest, you know, Cabin in the Woods style stuff, which is kind of saying, okay, so it's Evil Dead, so we need to do these. There's a very, very funny joke about the famous demonic POV shots, you know, in Evil Dead. I think Raimi tied the camera to a plank of wood, I think, and then ran around with someone else through the forest to kind of make it look like this evil presence was, you know, flying low over the ground and looking for someone to kind of invade and devour and do horrible things with. There's a very, very funny joke about the kind of the death of ingenuity in indie filmmaking based on that camera shot, which I don't want to kind of give away because it's very, very fun to discover in the moment. But after that kind of prologue, it then kind of rewinds, it was sort of one day earlier, and it goes back to this decaying apartment block in Los Angeles. And so what he's doing is basically saying, okay, so we're going to do Evil Dead-like stuff, but we're going to do it in a completely new setting that this has not been tried in before. And the object is to make a film, I think, that feels at once kind of comfortingly familiar for people who love the franchise, but also really gleamingly fresh. And it's doing things that you've not necessarily seen an Evil Dead film do before, even though the kind of machinations are the same. And the result of this experiment, in this case, I think are resoundingly successful. And I think it's because it's done with such incredible ingenuity and like a respect for the source material. But also this willingness to push it in a new direction.
So before we get into what happens, let's have a little clip. Now, we did ask for a suitable clip for this lovely podcast audience. Unfortunately, it's just mainly squelching that came back.
But that's fairly representative of the film.
I'm sure. So we're going to play a clip from the trailer, and then perhaps you can tell us what's going on. Here is The Evil Dead Rise.
It was the perfect day. All I could think about was how much I wanted to cut you all open and then climb inside your bodies so that we could stay one happy family.
When I was just a little girl.
Okay, there's a little girl in this.
Yeah. And even the usable clip was about 50% squelch, in fairness.
Mainly eggs, though. So
yes, the main speaker there was Ellie, who's this single mother played by Alyssa Sutherland, who lives in this decaying apartment block with her 3 kids, Danny, Bridget and Cassie. And her sister Beth, who's played by Lily Sullivan, has come to stay. She's a guitar technician who's been on a world tour. And we find out very, very early in the film, I think first or second scene, that she's become pregnant on the tour. And there is a tension. The sisters, they're not kind of estranged, but there's a tension between the two of them that suggests a tough upbringing and this certain ambivalence around motherhood. Perhaps their own mother was not necessarily the most nurturing person. And they're both kind of wrestling in their own way with this idea of what it is to kind of, now what's, I mean, we're going to get back into this with Dead Ringers, but this idea to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? To nurture something within you that then comes out into the world.
Okay.
Right? Which is, of course, in a horrible, disgusting way, what the Evil Dead films are all about. So the oldest kid, Danny, finds, there's an earthquake and finds in this vault under the block of flats this ancient book and also a series of vinyl recordings of its most kind of terrifying incantations. He's an aspiring teacher. He puts this onto his decks in his room and of course summons forth all these horrors which then invade the mother and then she's chasing them around with various household utensils. If you've seen the trailer, you'll know there's a nasty bit of business with a cheese grater.
Oh God, I keep hearing about this cheese grater scene and it just freaks me out so much.
That's not the half of it, okay? That's mild. And
I'm never seeing this film.
The film works so well for two reasons. The first one is that the way that Cronin structures it is that there's constant escalation. So it starts with all this kind of smart psychological stuff about motherhood that's kind of ticking away, bubbling away in the background. And then things get worse, and then they get worse and worse and worse. And there's a sense like, where are we going to stop here? You know, what's going to be, what where's the limit? What can't we show? In that same way that I felt while watching Evil Dead 2. And then by the time you reach the finale, you kind of realize, well, there is no limit. Because what we're seeing here is completely disgusting. I mean, it's completely disgusting. But in a really strange way, tonally, it doesn't feel sadistic. And I have this kind of allergy to when horror films, like the Saw films, get a little bit too pleased with themselves about what tortures they're inflicting on people. And somehow this doesn't do that. So that's one reason it works so well. The other is that the post-possession performances by Alyssa Sutherland and by Gabrielle Eccles, who plays Bridget, the middle child, are really, really scary. And they're augmented by some of the most terrifying practical makeup I've seen in ages, which has been really artfully tweaked with CG. So just to kind of boost the uncanniness, you never look at something and go, okay, this is a VFX. This has clearly been fiddled with. But there's just kind of, you know, grins slightly kind of unhinged and eyes made more glary in non-human ways. It's very, very well done. I think that my one issue with it is with a little bit of tweaking, it needn't have been an Evil Dead film at all. And you kind of think, well, maybe it would have been fun to have an homage-y Evil Dead style film that was the start of a completely new horror creation rather than just kind of burning all this talent on what is essentially a fifth franchise entry. But if this is the way we're going to get people sitting down in front of really great horror
I was going
films,
to say, this is going to
maybe
introduce
that's kind of okay.
people presumably to earlier, hopefully not the remake because that was terrible. And I
thought the remake was okay. I thought it was perfectly decent.
I had an experience in the cinema where it was a critic screening. I was sitting in the cinema and Alan Frank walks in late. In the middle of this, it was incredibly tense scene.
Alan Frank of the Daily Star, is that right? Yes. Late of the Daily Star. He no longer works for them.
Yes. And he walked in and just searching for a seat, just planted his hand on my head very hard. And I screamed incredibly loudly. And that's sort of like my overwhelming memory of watching the remake of Evil Dead.
Yes, right. I mean, it's like Bruce Campbell's scuttling fingers just kind of throwing over your shoulder. And the thing is, Cronin does do a little bit of fan service. So he says, okay, you know, like a catchphrase will pop up here. Of course, there's a chainsaw. You know, there's all this stuff. The tendrils in the woods, the tree roots are, you know, they become the electric cables in a lift shaft. So there's all this kind of stuff, but he's not kind of mainly interested in paying homage or paying tribute. He's kind of wanting just basically to scare you witless. It succeeded. And
just really quickly, does it kind of pay homage to the wackiness and the sort of humour of the originals?
It does, but with a straight face. So it's kind of relying on you to understand, like there's no winking, which I think maybe that's why it doesn't feel sadistic to me, is that it's not kind of chuckling away on the outside of this torture because the whole thing is basically taking place in one apartment. You're in that apartment. You're not kind of outside the apartment scoffing and tittering. You're actually in there with them. So yes, it does.
You've sold it very well for horror fans and definitely not for people like me who can't handle that level of scare.
Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. While you're here, check out all the other videos because they're cool too, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you want to keep up to date with everything Kermode and Mayo's take, then check out our social channels.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
I mean, I would.
There you
I
go.
have done.
Excellent.